Today, we have Mr. Nitin Chandran, co-founder and CEO of MedPiper. Hi, Mr. Nitin. Thank you for coming to the show. What does MedPiper do? Can you give us a quick pitch on what MedPiper is and what it does?
Thank you, Hira. MedPiper, the mission at MedPiper for us is to deliver standardized consumer health checkups for 1 million plus Indians with the same quality of service across India. Today, the consumer health checkup experience is primarily driven by when you walk in, you have zero predictability in terms of the kind of quality and the experience that you get. That is a problem that we are trying to solve for. We today do over 2 lakh plus health checkups a year. We are growing at 20% month on month, and we today serve health checkups at about 7,000 plus pin codes in India.
That's very interesting. And to break it down to a step further, could you maybe describe MedPiper in 3 words?
Precision health data for consumers with corporate coverage in India.
So how did you go about establishing MedPiper, and how did you approach the problem in itself?
The broader thesis was the consumer behavior is becoming increasingly digital, and you today have 5-minute deliveries, 10-minute deliveries, where at the time that you think you want access to services. This unfortunately is not possible in healthcare the way healthcare is today, right? Healthcare wasn't built for the consumer technically. It was built aimed at the providers. So the thesis we had that it would require a company to come in and build the middle layer so that supply can talk to the changing behavior of demand that is there today. Consultations, Practo was already solving for. Medicines, pharmacy was already a large player. Wellness is a long tail. And healthcare basically is these 4 levers: consultations, medicines, labs, and wellness. Labs is therefore what we focused on. And in labs, again, today great companies like Healthians, Orange, etc. have solved for your standard blood sampling. What we focus on is a little bit more on the comprehensive testing where there is some element of radiology involved and you are not paying for it. Either your employer is paying for it, or your insurance is paying for it, or your subscription with one of these platforms is paying for it. That is the problem that we are solving for today.
Okay, so what was the original idea of MedPiper and what it is currently today versus what is the long-term vision of MedPiper?
The original idea was we actually pick consultations to work with first in non-consumer use cases. So that would be hospitals that require doctors, or platforms that require doctors, or even insurers for the purpose of underwriting who require doctors. But we realized that both from a cost and a consumer point of view, there wasn't room to drive a lot of efficiency. Right? But when it came to diagnostics, it was actually our clients who pushed in this direction, where they said, look, your tech is great and you have solved this problem for us, but here's a bigger problem. Can you solve it? And that's how we got into it. And once we got into it, we realized that the operational parameters and nuances much more detailed. And that ended up becoming a larger opportunity for us to focus on. And today, that is what the company is about. We are at about 3 million in ARR today, and we are on track to being about 10 million in the next 12 months.
That's interesting. Congratulations on your journey. And now to get onto a little on the personal side of the story, right? So what's one unexpected lesson that you've learned into entering the healthcare industry that you didn't see coming?
If you are actually solving for care delivery, not for software, not for efficiency, but you're actually solving for care delivery, that could be preventive care, or that could be, palliative care, or it could be, here's a sick person and they need access to coverage. You eventually at some point of your journey have to become consumer facing, or you need to have a front that talks to the consumer. B2B today has not figured out the exact nuances of it. So as much as you are building a solution, you also have to be consultative. You have to go to your clients and also tell them what is the best part to take ahead. And that means engaging with an end user with whom ideally you did not want to be engaged with on day 0.
Now, did you have a data-driven aha moment of saying, now this is what will make MedPiper a scalable solution?
There was a point where we were doing consultations and diagnostics parallelly. The growth curve on consultations was already at peak. We were doing probably a 300x number on consultations. Diagnostics was fairly small at that point. But the way NPS and transactions were flowing in diagnostics, we saw that the uptick was going to happen, and we decided to double down on that, and that's actually moved the needle a lot for us.
So, how do you define a good market for a startup, and what frameworks do you use to evaluate the industry potential?
This actually goes back to the previous question. The aha moment for us happened when consumers who were not supposed to be engaged with us directly started literally Googling us and saying that, look, I go to that lab, but I don't want to go directly. Can you arrange a consultation? Because that time the experience was much better, right? And once you start seeing this manifest on scale, then you realize that the market is already there. Healthcare is an extremely mature market, right? Diagnostic market size is well defined, IPD market size is well defined, insurance market size is well defined. It is possible for you to spend 6 hours and come back with data that in South Bangalore here is the X number of maternity surgeries that happen in a day. So the data point is already there. The jump that you need to make is that how do I solve it for the consumer or the customer in a way where current systems are failing them, right? That is where the fact that we were able to do it, we had consumers coming in and saying that, look, you guys have solved for it, so I don't want to drive the transaction, I'll pay you and you guys only do the transaction. That is where we realize that the product and solution fitment is starting to fall into place, and we now need to double down on this. The market sizes, especially post COVID, we are one of the sickest countries in the world from a health standpoint of view. Globally, cardiovascular diseases manifest at 38, 39. Asia, it's at 36. In India, it's at 32. Right? We are the non-alcoholic fatty liver capital of the world. We are the diabetic capital of the world. 45% of the people in urban cities in India today have at least one or more lifestyle diseases, right? So, and the food habits that we have, we don't have a lot of proteins in our diet. And it's a combination of factors. Our cities are urban clusters built very badly, which means that pollution is a major problem. So if you look at the next 5 years, the data is already there that we are failing badly we are going to fail badly from a health point of view, right? So that's a larger, broader market reading that you take and you say that, look, I know we can confidently build in this space. Then it's the smaller nuances of saying how are we going to complete that journey, which is that we will focus only on diagnostics, and especially the ones that have a mix of pathology and radiology in it, and then doubling down and saying we will also go after the only ones that have coverage. Right? So that's the path we took.
So Nitin, what's one thing that you've learned about entering healthcare industry that you did not see coming?
Being prepared for bad payment cycles.
Uh-huh.
In a standard industry like SaaS or consumer play, you're getting paid immediately. Enterprise play, you know that there's a contract in place, 30, 60 days, you're prepared for it. In healthcare, the user is probably never the payer, which means that there's a secondary invoice or a tertiary invoice raised somewhere behind. And in that complex set of things, for money to come through to you, it takes about 60 to 90 days minimum. So that being prepared for that, nobody on the team was. And if we weren't funded, that would have been extremely difficult for us.
Now, given that you're saying a healthcare industry is quite slow moving,
Right.
did that shift your way on how you approached MedPiper's initial go-to strategy, as in the go-to-market strategy? Did you see a shift in the way you approached it, given that you understood that it's a very slow moving?
We saw that as a benefit.
Uh-huh.
Right? If it was fast moving, capital or a function of how much capital you have would have dictated who wins the market. The way we saw it is because it was slow moving, you had enough time to build conviction, get your product out, get it tested, and build your thesis for doing the next set of things that you had to do. So the early version, we did not have a product. It was more services based. And because the industry was slow paced, it gave us the bandwidth to completely iterate and make slow steps so that we were able to scale. So for us, it was a benefit. But in the longer scheme of things, of course, you have to be prepared for it.
Healthcare isn't like SaaS or consumer startups, like you said. So this requires a clear understanding of the ecosystem. So how did you go about validating that there's a real business opportunity in this space?
Being an outsider, being somebody who is not a healthcare practitioner, one of the simplest things you can adopt if you're building for healthcare, is being very cautious about the amount of limited visibility that you have and trying to build and get your results within that frame. Right? Do not build for unknowns. That is going to be extremely difficult in healthcare to validate. So one of the things we did was we were in the first version solving for doctors, and it was about saying that, look, we are solving for a very narrow band of doctors who are what we call locum doctors, and we will not try to expand this to specialists because we had no behavioral insights or we had no visibility into how they operate on a day-to-day basis. So that is super critical. Knowing that what is your frame of reference, and as you operate inside that frame of reference, try to expand what you can see a bit more. But any short-term actions, incentives, and outcomes have to be driven within that context.
So, as a follow-up question, you're not like traditionally in the healthcare space, right?
Right.
You've been an engineering student. How did you get to know your frame of reference, or how did you know the knowns?
A lot of dirty feet on the ground, spending time with the doctors. So MedPiper, although the company was incorporated in 2020, it was a project that I had been working on from 2019 March, right? And I would work 6 days a week. Sunday was me going and meeting doctors. So I had a good network of friends who were doctors. The genesis or the root of the idea came from there. And building the hypothesis that no matter how much digital first approaches you take, healthcare in India is still primarily brick and mortar, right? And the practitioners are also not actively looking at IT as a solutioning to any of their workflows. Forget patient engagement.
Correct.
Right? So at that point of time, it was about saying that, look, if this is the nature of the user, how do I validate that there are more users like this? And how do I derive a homogeneous problem statement? So first was validation, second is deriving a homogeneous problem statement, and the third is what is the minimal amount of productization or servicing that I need to do to check if I can solve for this, right? So I would have talked to about 800 plus doctors, visited close to 200 plus hospitals before I even said, okay, I'm going to actively do this. So conversations are important.
So how did you get into that? Like you said, you had friends, but that requires a little more, I think, a skill to actually crack into your users and get the conversations going and actually extract useful information from them.
Right.
Do you have any a framework or a mental model where how you went about it, or was it like a natural instinct?
There was a lot of traits that I picked up. I was working in growth and sales, so user journeys and user interviews was something that was a part of my job description. Beyond that, there's a book called The Mom Test, which is super useful for founders who are doing early exploratory conversations. So when you talk to users, that is why your base needs to be large enough, or else you end up with statistical bias.
Okay.
So if you assume that there is going to be a large problem that I'm solving for, inherently that means there is going to be a sizable user base.
Correct.
And you at least need to talk to a significant percentage of that in your hyper local market to arrive at the conclusion that you want to arrive. That is very important. Not talking to users makes all the difference between, or potential users, and eliminating or deciding that this is the approach that I want to take. That is very important in the early days.
Now, speaking of early days, if given a student wants to now, or an aspiring entrepreneur want to get into the healthcare industry, what would you recommend be the first few steps that they mandatorily do so that they have a strong base to begin with?
Are we talking about people who are practitioners or people who are engineers or from other domains building for health?
Majorly diverse backgrounds, non-traditional backgrounds associated with healthcare.
Non-traditional folks, the first thing to nail down is the grammar or the semantics that the industry uses. We call it contractual staffing. The industry calls it locum shifts.
Okay.
Right. And you could be going and sitting in front of a hospital or a small clinic, selling for 45 minutes, and you could be talking about completely different things if you're using the word contractual staffing. Right. So it is super critical that you build your street lingo about the domain you're solving for. Right. Second is, in things like healthcare, because they deal with people's health and people's lives, you might not get the kind of access to your potential users the way that you can get to developers or you're building in D2C, etc. So try to shadow users. Try to use your primary and secondary network as much as possible. Third, always be open to getting all your assumptions wrong.
Okay.
Right? If they've done maths in high school or college, Bayes' theorem is actually applicable in real life. If you're building startups, you have a foundation, but always be open to new data that comes in and be willing to step back and say, I could be completely wrong about this. Early days, these three things are super critical.
I think it's a top sign for our students to take stats subject seriously. So that is something I think it's one of the biggest key takeaways from this half of the conversation.
Yes.
Now, given that you've mentioned about the data, right? There's a lot of privatization to the data in healthcare industry. And it's also pretty, I wouldn't say cryptic, but hard to get access to. So how did you get access to your data, and how did you know if this data was good enough to begin or to evaluate your idea?
So when you're evaluating, you're looking at primarily two levers. Is there what you call economic efficiency, in the sense that if I'm going to invest X amount of hours and Y amount of money into this, when do I see Z returns, right? And for that assumption to come true, does the unit economics work? Is there a payer? What is their willingness to pay? When do they pay? This was something I ignored early on. The first two questions I did ask, when do they pay, was something I ignored, and we had to learn a hard lesson about it, right? The second piece second lever you will want to focus on is how much of domain expertise do you really need to solve that problem, right? Maybe it's not necessary in the get-go. It's something that you can pick up on the way. So as I said, limited frame of reference, but absolute clarity on the underlying economics about it.
Okay. So what did your unit economics look like for MedPiper?
So the first version that we were doing, we were very clear that we might not make money on it, because we were a middle layer solving for supply demand. Our money would have been on transaction fees, but we didn't build the IT for it. So the first thing we tried to validate was that can we even own the liquidity there, which is, can we have enough supply and enough demand at any point of time to have, let's say, 50 transactions a day. Then it became 200 transactions a day, 500 transactions a day. So the first things we were checking for is, can we actually capture value first, and then try to monetize.
Now, healthcare monetization is not very straightforward, right? There's a lot of back and forth and a lot of other complexities and dimensions involved in this. Now, there's no simple SaaS pricing model, like you said. So how did you decide that this would be MedPiper's revenue model?
Value discovery is a continuous process. We even do it today.
Okay.
But today we have much more maturity about what is the value we bring to the table. Broadly, if you have to look at it, you could be healthcare, you could be health tech, but you could be solving for different set of users. Eventually, the industry is fairly simple. There are people who are either unwell or on their journey of becoming unwell. They're willing to spend X amount of money on it. That money gets split between hospitals, doctors, nurses, and then they need to have the unit economics to allow for a software purchase or a hardware purchase. So if you have insight into whom you're solving for and what is their minima and maxima in terms of paying capacity, right? You can't build a software for doctors and charge 600 rupees per usage, because the doctor might be only taking 150 rupees as a consultation fee. IT budget is not on top of that list, right? So understanding these nuances early on, and then figuring out that, look, we are solving for a localized problem, which is hospitals don't have access to doctors at the right time. This means that they have to turn away patients. So we anchored on that first and then built on top of it.
Okay. So as a follow-up question to what you said earlier, now there's a trade-off between charging institutions and charging the end users.
Right.
So how did you figure out your pricing strategy through this? Like, how did you think through this?
One way to think about it is opportunity loss.
Okay.
If they don't get access to my product or services, what do they lose on? If somebody is unwell, hospital A does not have the doctor, that person is not going to come back tomorrow. That person is going to go to the nearest next hospital, right? So there is an opportunity loss for that clinic or hospital by not having manpower at that point of time. But So that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is, as I said, per doctor or per consultation, there is a cap on how much they can charge. So therefore, your value has to come between 0 and some percentage of consultation fee that they are willing to share as a part of enabling manpower at that particular point of time. So that's the first set of hypotheses that you make. And once we started doing it, then it was okay, there are these additional services that they require. Do they want prescription generation? What does it? So if you are looking at something that generates revenue for them, you would look at it as a percentage of value. If you are looking at something that derives efficiency for them, you would want to look at a cost plus structure. That's the way to, at least early days, that's simpler for you.
Okay. Following up on what you said, long sales cycle has been a major pain point for B2B health tech. How did you navigate this challenge and how did you cope up with that long sales cycle?
It goes back to what is the degree of value that you're selling. If you package your product as, for example, IT, IT might not be on top of the list for the MD of the hospital, for the person in charge of the floor, or as a part of their key operations this quarter, right? Versus if you package it as improved footfall or higher ticket sizes or better efficiency, you have to understand the stakeholders and understand their short-term priority as well as their long-run priority. There are hospitals where department heads do not have P&L obligations. You will have a similar competitor where the department head has a P&L obligation. So it is important for you to understand that nuance and therefore work backwards that, okay, these are going to be my early set of targets because this is what their payment and collection cycle is going to look like.
Now that you've understood these nuances of the healthcare industry as such, how did you navigate your early user adoption? Like you said, IT is not on the top of their budget. Then how did you ease in them into this early adoption and who are your actual early adopters?
So our early adopters were, the first set were hospitals in trauma care that wanted access to locum doctors in the night when you have trauma ambulance vans turning up and you wanted to have doctors on the field, right? They were the first set of customers that we had. And as we evolved, then slowly that moved away from them to hospitals that have much more, let's say, higher footfall during certain cycles. And they would want to have people to man those wards or man those floors at that point of time. And then when we had a pivot in terms of what we were offering, that subset changes. We stopped selling to hospitals only.
Now, speaking of pivoting, right, there's a lot of moments where a founder has to decide, hey, now this is a moment I really have to pivot.
Right.
How did you decide upon that this is a correct time to pivot and what triggered your pivot?
What triggered, I'll answer that bit first. The market was shrinking the way we saw it. Teleconsultations post-COVID second wave. So a bit of backstory, what ended up happening was once we started serving hospitals, COVID wave platforms started coming to us. So some of the largest platforms in India were also using us to get access to doctors. COVID first wave, we had a decent run. Second wave, I saw on a platform level, two set of things happening. The ticket sizes were always being subsidized by the platform themselves, which meant that the true value of consultation was never recognized. Right. Second, your senior doctors who would ideally command more volumes, or people want to talk to senior specialists, ticket sizes tend to be higher. They were using this back as secondary or tertiary preference because they wanted to go to hospitals. So the minute a doctor steps out of a particular years of experience, they want to build their brand, which means that for a business that is a platform or a network, you're breaking two of the most fundamental foundations which have to be there, which is there has to be constant supply that continuously wants access to the same set of audience. That supply liquidity was not there. It was going away. And two, your transactions are not what is reflecting versus how those transactions were being created, were not, honest is not the right word, were being incentivized to be at a particular number. But if you take away those incentives, they would drop drastically. Right. And so the writing was pretty much clear for us on the wall that maybe another 6 months or 7 months we will see a drastic drop. That actually happened 6 months later, where globally the TAM of teleconsultations was declared to be zero.
Okay.
Right. So I think because we were already running a business, we were already tracking the key metrics on a platform level, we were able to capture it a little earlier. And something else we were doing as an experiment on the side was actually taking off really well. So we focused on that.
Okay. So how does one evaluate on this is a right time to pivot in terms of a new founder or an aspiring founder?
So pivot is also at the end of the day a decision of, do I do A versus B, right? Um, Doctor aggregation was working, but we built a good technology stack, and then we had some of our clients say that, look, you have solved for doctors, can you solve it for diagnostics also, like fragmented inventory, non-standardized packages, etc., etc. So we knew that we were good with tech, and we knew that that was surely rising, not at the same rate as doctors, right? But the ticket sizes were higher. Once we started catering to that industry, we realized there is actually much higher margins, payment cycles are better, etc. And so we were continuously scoping out if that was going to be the secondary opportunity for us, right? But once we saw the writing on the wall that consultations were going downhill, then it was purely an option of saying, do we make that decision today versus do we make it 6 months down the line?
Now, speaking about pivoting, right? Product market fit is quite tricky when it comes to healthcare.
Yeah.
Especially because it's not just about user adoption, but there's a lot of compliance, regulation, and integration right in place of all of the complexity that's already existing.
Right.
So, how did you figure out product market fit for MedPiper?
Product market fit in healthcare has a very different meaning compared to even standard tech industries. You're assuming that there is a standard set of problems in a well-defined market, and therefore you can, like Rubik's Cube or, like your standard set of puzzles that you have fit into that. There is a continuous evolution of needs that happens, right? So one of the things you have to do in software, in health primarily, is be aware that the nature of your service delivery might evolve at any point of time. Therefore, your product cannot exactly be fully that nuanced or that specific that it is bound to serve only X or Y. There has to be a degree of, I would say, objectivity in saying that, look, we understand the scope of evolution that might happen around the problem statement, and whatever we build, whatever we invest in, whatever we are solving for, must accommodate a larger set of variables there. I hope that answers the question there.
That does answer quite a lot of insight. It was very insight-packed for product market fit. Now, again, a follow-up question to it. Many startups chase vanity metrics, right? So, when it came to MedPiper, what is one metric that you thought was super important, but it did not really matter as such in the long run?
We don't think it was even vanity metrics. It goes back to your PMF question. During COVID first wave, we thought we had PMF because we were doing close to 1 million consultations a month, right? That's a massive number. We were tracking platform metrics, which is how many engagements are happening, what is the size of each transaction, how long is each consultation, etc. In hindsight, today what I would feel is vanity metrics is not just about saying, broader vanilla things like valuation or growth metrics, but even when you have a hypothesis and indexing on that metrics around those hypotheses and believing that, look, I seem to have solved this problem for this hypothesis audience, that is a much more dangerous set of vanity metrics, which can misguide you inherently.
Okay. Is that something that you really faced in the early days for MedPiper?
Yeah.
How did you navigate that? Like little breakdown on how did you deal with that complexity and how did you cope up with it or overcome that particular situation?
We didn't overcome, we took our hits. We were practically close to drowning there. It was just pure survival instinct that, look, this can't be all there is to it. And being very conscious that there is always a chance that this might any day flip the switch. So I think that also that's something that YC also inculcates in its founders. You sniff metrics going wrong or the validity of metrics faster than hopefully your competitors as well as your own end users. That helped us at that point of time.
Now, what's one thing that you're still figuring out and what's one thing that entrepreneurs should know for sure before they declare that they've hit the product market fit?
Scale.
Okay.
And it's not a flag set in stone, right? The problems that we had while growing from 0 to the first 10 lakhs in revenues versus 10 lakh to 1 crore versus 1 crore to, today 10 crores in revenue for us is that some of the mistakes that founders make is they fall in love with the solution and not the problem. And they kind of anchor themselves into it. Their identity gets defined by saying, I am a founder who's building this, instead of saying, I am a founder solving for this set of problem. I think that's a larger mistake, I would say. Everything else is something that you can always intervene and do a postmortem and solve for it. But getting married to your solution is the worst thing.
I think that also follows up on one of my favorite book titles, like falling in love with the problem and not with the solution.
Yeah.
So you got to stick to your problem statement and then reverse engineer on what would be the appropriate solution to the problem. Is that what you have?
And continuously be looking at the problem again to ensure that you might not be the only one solving for that problem. There might be 50 other players, right? Are they looking at the problem the same lens that you are looking at? Need not be true.
Okay.
Right? And is the problem changing? Will that problem stop existing, 5 years or 5 months down the line, right? Today, just to take an example, today for nobody in this room is tracking time a problem. In my grandfather's time, that is life or death.
Yeah.
Right? So you didn't have fridge, your food could go bad. You didn't know how to turn up on time to places. So the problem has to exist. Today that problem does not exist, right? And that's a larger time frame. Even in the short run, so for us teleconsultations was amazing at a point of time. They said that the world is now moving to this model. Today people don't even talk about it. It's a forgotten bad memory for a lot of them. So you have to be conscious that is the problem also evolving. Every problem exists within a landscape. If the landscape does not exist, then the problem does not exist. So you have to be aware about the mortality of that landscape also.
So how do you evaluate or understand that you are solving the correct problem? Do you ever come to that realization, or do you have?
You're always trying to solve the correct problem. What you want to check for is life signs that the problem exists and the nature that these other people are approaching that problem has not changed, right? To take a specific example, getting access to diagnostic health checkups 10 years back in India had nothing to do with the individual themselves. It was that doctor would tell you that, look, we think you are sick and I want access to this data, and therefore you need to go to a lab, draw your blood, get your x-ray, etc., etc. People never looked at their own data, right? Today, you have what is called 90 million plus health conscious individuals in India. That number is growing exponentially, who want to own what their health checkup is. They go and get health checkups done on their own, right? So there's now a new market created to it. So that is an evolution of a problem, right? It was not a problem to start off with. Then behavioral started changing. So that's the key thing. You look at the behavior of the users today dealing with the problem, and you see the change in behavior and workflows around them.
Now that certain behavior, right, of being health conscious and wanting to know your own self in terms of data points or in terms of health levels, right? Did that change in behavior affect your product roadmap in any way?
Yes.
Or how you approached certain customers or your end users?
Yeah, that helped us pretty much redefine what we are solving for.
Okay.
We are B2B because of the fact that we know there are these large platforms who have users who want to take control of their health metrics. And that market got created at this particular time in our history, right? And because that need is there is why we exist today.
Now, once you find the traction, right, scaling efficiently becomes the biggest problems. Okay. So what were the biggest hindrances that you faced while you were trying to scale?
So we had a chicken and egg problem because you're a marketplace. You want enough supply, you want enough demand, and sometimes acquiring supply takes capital. Right? You have to deploy IT, you have to deploy resources so that you bring that network onto the table. And without this network, you can't go to demand. Like for a client, let's say, who has 100,000, a lakh people in India signed up on a diabetes control program, I can't go and tell them that, look, only in Coimbatore I will solve this problem for you. If I solve for that problem for them, I have to solve for wherever they have even one user, right? That was hard early on, and a lot of the early capital raise that we went into ensuring that we have liquidity, from what we call liquidity from a supply side point of view.
Now, there's a difference between growing and scaling,
Right.
right? For MedPiper, how did you scale sustainably? What were your approach or what were your strategies to scale sustainably and quite efficiently? Because you went from zero to first 10 lakhs and then 10 lakhs to your first crore and 1 crore to now 10 crores in revenue. So, how did you scale that efficiently and sustainably?
So growth is primarily about saying, are there more set of users who have the same set of problems and now have certain iterations of it, and can we also solve for them? So instead of solving for one specific problem, you are solving for a complete workflow, right? Scale is where you are saying that, okay, here is now a unit of a product. How many units of this can I now sell, right? Without doing a lot of it, you're primarily not investing on R&D and new development. You are investing on maintenance as well as putting more of those units out there, right? The scale is something that we've just hit late half of 2024. We're actually closer to think about 30 crores in revenue right now. Last year same time we were 1/10 of this, right? So the scale is something that happened for us in the last 12 months. Before that, it was about growth, from saying that they can solve for this small piece to saying they can solve for the whole piece.
Now that we've spoken about scaling and we also spoke about operational bottlenecks, what were your most expensive mistakes that you made that you had to correct?
In spite of all the advice that YC gives, most of the YC founders make this mistake. We go and still make a senior sales leadership hire, which is not needed at a particular point of time, because you as a founder are still absorbing a lot of things. So I am also the sales founder, right? So I think personally for me that was one big avoidable mistake, I would say. But other than that, when we were growing, we confused growth for scale. We invested in building a marketing team. Not big, we had two, 3 people in it. Setting up the team was a mistake, and the way we set up a mistake, we hired somebody who's fantabulous at their job, but somebody who was at a Series B plus startup, which meant that they were used to having a large budget and a large team, right? And now suddenly they are in a seed stage startup that practically doesn't have any budget, right? So those were 2 expensive mistakes. Then in between, for a short time during a pivot, we forgot our fundamentals of being super conservative about not building product. That didn't hurt us much, but that was time lost for us.
So, speaking of hiring, right? How did you approach hiring for a startup that requires both technical and like a regulatory expertise?
The first person to join our team was actually a policy person.
Oh, interesting.
Which was a conscious choice. So I was doing sales, my co-founder was doing product, and the third person was a policy person whose job from day zero was that, look, from day zero, let's have these conversations opened up. We do not want to be caught blindsided. As we started building the product, we started building in such a way that regulatory aspects are a client side problem, right? So if they have not solved for it, it's not like we can solve for it. Because I am giving certain set of modules that complete a part of a workflow. Their workflow has to be compliant. So those are ways you can work around directly having to deal with regulations.
Now, in selling into hospitals, doctors, and enterprise clients, what was the best way to establish your credibility as a startup?
2 parts to that question: selling and credibility. If you are selling anything clinical in healthcare, get doctors on board. It could be your friends, it could be somebody from your 2nd degree network, 3rd degree network, or ecosystems like incubators, accelerators. So NSRCell has a good set of, there was a program that NSRCell used to run where they had doctors on board. So tap into that. First, get doctors aligned with your mission and vision so that you have that box ticked off, right? Having said that, don't try to sell to doctors, because doctors mostly do not have visibility to budgets at, it could be hospitals or enterprises, in the sense that they have already been, so if it's a doctor who's running a department who has some bandwidth in saying that this is what we want, this is what we don't want, they already have probably submitted a list of 50 things which they have not got. You are going to be item number 51, right? For an early stage startup, that could really hurt you. You could be actually solving a problem. The doctor might have needed it yesterday, but the org might not have even visibility to just engage in that conversation, right? Try to go to the source of your payment as much as possible. If the payer is the hospital, try talking to the hospital. If the payer is an insurer, try talking to the insurer. But incentive alignment has to be there. And that is a part of the homework that you do to understand domain expertise.
Okay, now when we said onboarding doctors as advisors, but not selling to doctors, now these are some of the counterintuitive lessons, right? Now, what were the other and some other counterintuitive lessons that you had picked up working or establishing in healthcare, especially as decision making as founders or in terms of strategy?
One of the first things we did was we did not build product. Whereas standard SaaS or tech advisors build the minimum viable product, we built the minimum viable service and understood the user behavior around it, built the product for it, and then evolved based on that. I know of companies, we share some common investors who have taken the opposite approach, but solving for healthcare. Those projects have not gone anywhere. Right? So that, and maybe it's an India problem. I am not sure about US. Second piece I would say is the user and the payer not being the same means that you might want to talk to the payer first, not user. The traditional sense would be try to understand the user and then upsell the value to the payer. In healthcare, that might not really work, right? Budget might be there, but budget might not be there in the next 12 months, right? So if it is not right up their problem stack, don't spend your next 12 months building for it.
So now speaking of these counterintuitive lessons, right? These lessons or these takeaways are counterintuitive because it's a hybrid marketplace or platform-based startup, or is it because of the domain in which you're operating in?
It's more the domain and less the business model itself. The reason I say that is if you are solving for, let's say, a workflow problem, right? A user has to complete a certain set of actions to derive an outcome. So in a hospital sense, it's, for example, a doctor doing his ward rounds, taking an update and generating a report on the wellness of a particular user during that particular visit. If you step out into, let's say, enterprise, let's say it's a monthly check-in by the product manager or consumer survey team who's talking to an X set of users and generating a report there, right? Your enterprise SaaS operates at 70-80% gross margins. Therefore, the kind of tooling, the kind of teams that they can build for and solve for that are fairly high budget, right? Hospitals anyway operate at thin margins, A, right? Okay. And B, this is not a dedicated team sitting and doing it. It is a part of the doctor's existing workflow. So not being aware of the domain specific unit margins and the change in the nuance of that particular, why is that particular activity done, completely flips your business there.
How did you exactly build that level of nuances or understanding of nuances of this particular domain?
As a founder, especially if you are the sales founder, you have to be super shameless. You have to, on certain days, know that there are meetings set up, be willing to look in the mirror and say there is a good probability I'm going to look like an idiot today. But doesn't matter how that goes, I will come out of that meeting learning something, right? Especially in the early days when you are an outsider, that is super critical because you are grasping and learning. You're practically learning a new language, you're learning a new industry. And the good thing we have realized about this is people are not apprehensive. I mean, it's not a invite only domain, right? They want people to come in and solve problems for them because they have enough problems on their hands. It's just that the approach has been very binary that, look, we are digital first, therefore we won't even involve. Or there is some element of narrative that says that we are stacked against you or we are trying to replace you. That is wrong, right? So if you're willing to say that, look, I know that bias exists, I know that I might get brickbats for this, I know that I might come off looking like a fool to this particular conversation, but that is okay. I am here to learn. I will pick something of value here, and if possible, show them that yes, I have understood this and I will now come back to you again, having done my homework on this. That actually has made all the difference in how we have been able to actually go and build what we have today.
I think that is one of the like most important skill set, to have that resilience and also to be shameless in terms of asking for what you want and understanding and being in that space. Do you have anything else to add to that dimension of context?
Yes, today there is enough content available. So one of the first pieces we started solving for was medical underwriting for insurers. There is one of the largest universities in the US has an online course around it. I went and did that course and got certified. Right? It has nothing to do with engineering. Right? Then once diagnostic started picking up, today me and my co-founder probably know more about machines and tests, or as much as about machines and tests, as much as a technician on the field does. Right? That is purely because we said, look, if this is what is going to be the bread and butter of what we are going to be doing for the next 12 to 24 months, then we need to understand and know everything about it. The resources are already there. There are online courses, there are certifications, there's a gazillion YouTube channels which are talking about it. You just have to find them, put in the patience in saying that, okay, now I'm going to sit and learn. Founders who stop learning, I think the ones that I've seen, the founders who stop learning are the ones who also stop figuring out what needs to be done.
Okay, now speaking of online courses and certifications, right? Our degree program BBA DBE is majorly online, right? So although they give their exams online, the entire studying, learning, everything is all online. So since you've already had that first-hand experience, do you have any tips on how they can maximize their time in this program?
Absolutely. It's a privilege, right? If you had to come and sit 8 hours in a class, and let's say you want to step into entrepreneurship, you are limited by the fact that your working hours are spent in classrooms, locked doors, right? If you're doing things online, you actually get to go, step out, talk to people, do all the hard work, grunt work, and then come and sit for a online course at the end of the day or early morning and refine what you're doing. Did I do everything right? It's much more easier for you to do, meaning that now you don't have to wait to complete your degree to start, make mistakes and eventually land up on a correct path. You can just do it in parallel. And that, I think, is a fantastic opportunity.
Yeah, I think that is one biggest, I think, unique selling point for our courses, given that they're also having access to all these world-class faculty, and also they have that all the time with flexibility to work on different things, experiment, and figure out what is best for them.
Great. And there's a third piece, right? You also, if you can also find other peers who are doing the same thing, now that is just knocks it out of the park, right? You have people who can also now share that, look, these are the pieces I did today, and here are the mistakes that we did. And you can have a group thinking in terms of these are the problems that people in our batch are facing and what can we do about it. That exchange of knowledge and information is extremely valuable.
Yes. Also, again, a small question on how have you maximized it? Do you have like top 3 tips on how you've maximized your time or learning as a founder, on continuous learning as a founder? What are your top 3 tips to pick up skills to become a good founder?
I pick modules which are actionable over modules which are more theoretical. So, for example, right now we are in the middle of a larger fundraise, and parallelly I am studying and doing material on not just cosmetic financial models and stuff, but something much more closer to FRM, right? Because I feel that's a skill set I need to acquire. Earlier, when I was learning my building my muscle in enterprise sales, spending time in communities, going through playbooks there, more than theoretical. So, how do you know? So, there's something called price theory. How do enterprises value versus how do consumers value? Those are pieces that you would want to do when you're doing that particular action. So, one of the easiest way to actually make sense of what you're learning as well as what you're doing is try to correlate both of them. So, if you're learning about consumer behavior today, also to go and talk to consumers. If you're learning about how to do consumer interviews, go talk to people as a part of that, right? And eliminate, even if temporarily, things that do not align with your understanding and refine your understanding based on that.
Okay. Now, I think those are some really insightful tips, right? But I've been like little looped in on fundraising part of it.
Right.
Now, asking like a few questions on your current fundraising scenario. Can you like little bit quickly brief us on how is the fundraising for you right now and how you've positioned MedPiper to your investors, given healthcare is not similar to SaaS or say fintech when it comes to raising funds?
Unfortunately for us, we have been racing at the both when we started MedPiper, raised our seed round, and when we are racing today, we have been at the worst funding cycles the world has ever seen. So that has always been a challenge for us, but it's also been a validation in the sense that the kind of investors that we've already always got were people who had conviction and people who have not just seen that this plays out, but also knows that this is a problem that needs to be solved. It wasn't just pure opportunistic that look, this could be the next big thing and therefore we'll write a check about this. That has been good for us. Today when we look at it, we very clearly know what is the problem that we are solving for and the impact that it could have over the next 5 years, 7 years and 10 years. Right. So there's a 5-year IPO story that is very clearly possible. There is a template of existing businesses having already done that in a very traditional manner. And there are a set of investors who have been a part of that journey also. So the homework today is about saying, hey, how do we find investors who understand the story? And how do we do our homework to ensure that the key metrics or the key foundational proof that they want to see is already there in our current business, and therefore eliminate the friction and the errors that is possible in seeing to the end outcome.
I think I'm still a little hooked on why has it been like a bad fundraising rounds? Like, is there any situational reasons for
Yeah.
it?
So in India, healthcare investments in health tech, 2014, 2015 saw a boom, 2018 saw a boom. You still in India do not have a Flipkart in healthcare. There has never been a great outlier, right? Most of your large businesses which have been about solving traditional problems with technology have kind of plateaued at 350, 400 crores at max. Everybody else is, you have maybe 1 or 2 winners which are still private, which have not gone and listed. So for a standard VC cycle who's looking at an exit in 3 to 4 years or 5 years, nobody in that horizon has actually given them a great exit, right? And people who have tried to change or tweak healthcare delivery to suit that model have actually shut shop.
Okay.
Right. So healthcare is still traditional. You have to be aligned with the traditional healthcare mindset that, so we are already 4 years into a journey. We are building to be on track to an IPO in another 5 years. So we are talking about an 8 or 10-year investment. The amount of funds that can actually deploy that patient capital on that time cycle, they are small, right? And the fact that prior proofs don't exist means that until 1 proof or 2 proof comes out, you will not have a lot of people eager to write checks there.
So, how did you onboard your first or your early investors, given that there's so much complexity to this?
That's where YC helped for us. We were able to tap into a pool of investors who are global, where the way you look at it in India today, most investors still have mental models around certain things because we don't have enough proof. And if you fit that mental model, it will work for you. If you don't, it doesn't suit them. You know, it's not about being right or wrong. It's just that at that point of time, there is no conviction. It is that, do you fit a particular mental model or not? The advantage we had with YC was we could tap into global investors who already had either been a part of a journey or have seen this play out, which meant they had conviction, right? And conviction investors have always come through better and faster than mental model investors because, of course, they understand the play much better.
Again, I think one of my questions that I had in mind regarding YC was that YC is a great place for accelerating growth, right? But how does it apply to an industry where where there's a long sales cycle and where it's pretty slow when it compares to fintech and tech? So I was wondering, how did it apply? Is it because there are already set of investors or people who know that this is how the healthcare industry is going to be? Is it because of that particular awareness? Or do you think, is that something you strategized and worked upon to get them into play?
YC is agnostic to everything in a particular kind of way, right?
Okay.
So if you look at fintech, some of the largest fintech platforms today came out of YC. That includes Stripe, that includes in the US, you have Brex. In India, you have Razorpay, Grow, right? Meesho is YC. Of course, Meesho was able to grow much faster because that was also the timing. Social selling was going great. So, as far as YC is concerned, if the market size is huge enough and if the market seems ripe for disruption, it is more about the founders. If they think that these are founders who can pull off, right, and there is even a 1% chance that it might come true, it might happen, that's what YC looks at.
Now, speaking of investors, right, what are the common investor misconceptions about health tech startups?
I wouldn't say misconceptions. I can talk about my experience. Right,
Okay.
we have had great investors who have wired us money literally half an hour after the call. We've had investors who, for lack of a better word, wasted our time. Generally, the thumb rule we use now is: do you have exposure to healthcare, and ideally healthcare in India, and have you seen success stories or have you been a part of a success story? Those investors are always better for us.
Okay.
Right. The worst of the lot that we have seen are people who don't do their homework, and to a certain degree we have B2B and healthcare, which overcomplicates things in the sense that it is an enterprise sale and it is in a domain where trust matters a lot. So we did have one experience some time back where one, they had zero homework, and two, they wanted FaceTime with our clients without having guardrails or an agenda of what it is that exactly they are proposing, right? And you can't really waste your enterprise clients' time to build. I mean, it's possible for you to do recordings or testimonials, but then you can't be looking like a fool because of somebody who says, I'm probably writing these guys a check or thinking about it, talking to your client, and your client is now thinking that, do these guys have money? Will they be able to raise money? And this guy doesn't look like he knows anything. So now what should I do about the company, right? So that puts you in a very bad spot with respect to your clients also. So we have had to say no to a few investors when they said that, oh, okay, we will do this, we will do that also. So that's broadly the basket case of good investors and bad investors. You do have a lot of good investors who have been a part of the ecosystem, who have seen some of these plays and who want to continue to bet on this space. So they
I think,
exist.
yeah. So one of my other questions were also like, what are the red flags that an initial founder, or a first time founder need to look out for when they're raising funds, right?
They say that you can't be educating your customer or consumer, you can't also be educating your investor.
Okay.
They at least need to know what they're solving. The education should be about why us. It shouldn't be about why the problem exists or this is how they're looking at it. That is a major red flag. A lot of founders will end up wasting their time there.
I think you've had like a great asset in terms of being an YC alum, right?
Right.
So how did you get, or how did you manage to get into YC cohort, and how was the experience for you like?
YC for us has not just been extremely pivotal from a company standpoint, but from a founder point of view, it's before and after. Like, we don't think or operate the same way. We don't perceive things the same way that we did earlier. So when we applied to YC the first time, it was a solo show. I was just doing it on the weekends. We had a decent number of, I think, 800 plus doctors on the locum platform. And YC said, look, this is interesting, this is good, but two things. One, this is in India. We don't have partners in India who understand this. We know for a fact that India is large, and if you want to solve on scale in India, 800 won't cut it. Can you as a founder show that you can scale this to about 2000 or 3000, right? Whatever that larger number is. So the second time we applied, we were at about 15,000 doctors. So that showed that, yes, look, I can scale, I can solve for scale, and I can do it minimally. It was pretty much organically. There was no, I had no capital to deploy to acquire, so it had to be organic. And coincidentally, COVID happened. So then I think it's a convergence of forces that, yes, the founder seems to have solved for a problem the hard way, the smart way, I would say. And the world is now going to index on saying, how do we bring offline healthcare to much more digital friendly means? And that convergence helped us at that point of time that, yes, It ticks off the founder box, it ticks off the market need box, and that's how we got it. And we were the first online batch, which again was good for me. It circles back to what I said about the course, right? If we had to go to YC, we would have burnt money there. Staying, living expenses is not cheap. And then I would have to acquire doctors as well as hospitals in India here, which would not have been possible. We were just two guys, right? And it's approximately exactly 12 hours apart. So, being in India, being able to be really prudent and frugal, we were operating out of shared space in one of these co-working spaces. So, our cost was like practically low. Our burn was like less than 5,000 rupees or 6,000 rupees. At that point, we weren't taking salaries. And build the first set of productization and features so that we could start making money there. That would not have happened if we had to be there present offline, right? So that by the time demo day happened, we had pretty good metrics to show, and we were able to get a set of investors who were confident that this could scale up in India.
That's quite interesting, right? Given like you were the first online batch, how did you manage like the networking aspect of it? Because YCOM is known for their network of founders and investors, and how much like not just like investors and the money capital that they raise, but also the personal friendship that they develop during the YC cohort. That's something that I hear a lot on their online platform, right? So how was it experience for you being it online?
So YC solved for it for a long way. They had a Slack channel. There was anyway, geography specific WhatsApp groups. There's a Bangalore specific WhatsApp group. All of these are closed ecosystems of YC, right? Then YC has an internal YC bookface thing. So to a large degree, they did solve for it, mandatory meetups, etc. And beyond that, even at least my understanding is even when you are there, because it's a large pool, you are not just randomly going and sitting around people. Even if you are there offline, you are going to YC twice a week during that program, right? And that too again for dinners, etc. So those are things we did miss, of course. But Bangalore or in India, there are occasional meetups among founders. There was a culture of meetups very strongly before COVID. Now I think some of these meetups are happening again. But access is always there. As long as you are a part of the fraternity, you can always access and reach out.
How did you maximize that opportunity? Because most of our students are also all online, and their networking opportunities is pretty limited when it comes to online, of course, but they have managed to pull it off on their WhatsApp group, city meetups and everything. Do you have any tips regarding networking with their peers or like entrepreneurs or professors, especially when the setup is entirely staged online?
I would look at it from the lens of the fact that we are trying to build a business. So we had very specific reasons or problems we wanted to solve. For example, one would have been one of the first hacks that we did is once we had enough doctors and listings on the platform, we wanted to automate mapping. That mapping would disappear the minute a doctor had confirmed on it. And it had to happen, it had to be a bot, right? Because we couldn't manually manage anymore. Then it was about going back into the groups and saying, hey, has somebody already seen a problem like this? And if you have seen it, have you solved for it? If you're not even solved for it, what are the current approaches you have taken and what are the approaches you have eliminated, right? So the takeaway would be have an agenda, right? And be honest and clear about the agenda. That look, I am talking to you for XYZ versus I want to learn from, and be open about the fact that you're probably always learning, right? It's be aware that it's a very smart set of individuals, the top 1% from the world who have gotten, and these people know what they are doing, and they could always have an insight that you possibly aren't even aware of. So you want to let them talk, right? And you want to not waste their time. So be respectful, be mindful, know what you're in it in the conversation for, and be clear to the other party of what you expect from them.
I think these are some things that although intuitive, it needs to be reinforced at certain levels for them to actually maximize their the original digital platform.
So one
of
the things that YC did at that time was there were mandatory random founder assignments for check-in, but it cannot be more than 15 minutes, right? So you could force your way around building that early pieces.
Bookending it back to you being a founder, having all these experiences, being it in NSR Cell, be it YCOM, and seeing all these nitty-gritties and behind the scenes of being a real-time entrepreneur and going through all these difficulties, right, which makes you ultimately a very valuable guest of ours on the podcast, you would have had to taken thousand decisions on a daily basis, right? And it would include taking much of these tough calls. So, did you have any mental models or way you approached taking certain tough calls?
You can't really take a lot of good decisions in a day, right? So one of the first things is, and this is something YC, I think, in the beginning sessions, one of the first thing they try to double down to the founders is reduce the scope of decision making that you're doing. Ideally default to no. You do not want to be doing new things. Say that I'm going to do 3 things, validate, invalidate, and only then pick the next set of 3 things. But at any point of time, you're doing only 2 or 3 or 5 things, right? Optimize for speed rather than being correct. Second is trust your co-founders, not just in the fact that they'll deliver and be aligned on the vision, but that if you're wrong, they will stand up to it and they would tell you on your face that it is wrong, and trust their gut, right? There is a reason you probably are co-founders with. They would be at least, what I believe is, you should be the least smartest person in the room that you create, right? Only then are you learning and evolving. So as long as you are continuously learning, and as long as you can trust that that person also knows what they're speaking about, be judicious in saying that, don't be territorial. Let them do what they think is right. They are also equally in the journey, right? The third is surround yourself with smart people who can reduce the amount of decision making for you. It is always better to have a team member come in and say, look, we have these 4 problems. Here are the possible solutions around it. I'm going to pick and fly with this one. Are you nominally okay with it? Then somebody who just comes and say, hey, here's a new set of 4 problems. What do we do about it? Right. So you might want to hire small. You might want to not hire at all. But when you make a hiring, try to find smart people.
Yeah, I think I personally resonate with your second point where you say fail faster and learn quicker, because that is something that quickly reiterates and I think improves you much quicker, like exponentially, than like trying to be on a linear growth path. But the first point was very counterintuitive for me. Like I thought being a founder involves a lot of decision making, experimentation. But if you want to reduce your decision making framework or your, that particular this thing, that could you like elaborate more on it?
People inherently underestimate how many days there are in a year and overestimate what a year means in their head. So when people say that, look, I'm going to try something for a year, you're just saying that I have about 240 days to validate or invalidate certain pieces, which means now you can backtrack to saying I can spend only X amount of weeks or X amount of days to focus on a particular set of problems. So if you're going to say that, look, this year I want to validate for, are people using my product, or are people willing to pay for this? How many people are going to willing to pay for this? You need to start assigning a timeline that, look, I'm going to spend 10 days around this. It doesn't matter that outside of 10 days, I'm on day number 14, I might find a proof, but okay, that is somebody else's problem. For me, the mandate is 10 days. So you need to force yourself backwards, that I do not want to make 1,000 decisions. I want to make 5 decisions a day, but I want to make 5 good decisions a day. Your human brain cannot handle more than, I'm forgetting the exact science and statistics in it, but it is not more than 4 or 5 a day. Right? Ideally, keep it to 2 or 3 a day, you're in a good place. Anything beyond that, it's a lot of cognitive noise and you will be operating suboptimally.
I think that also kind of answers my next question that I had in mind, as in how do you deal with decision fatigue and uncertainty?
Right.
I think limiting yourself to certain number of decisions that you take in a day, while that being optimal was the answer. And do you have anything else also to add to it?
Do not solve for problems whose scope are beyond your visibility for the 8 or 12 hours anyway, especially in the early days, right? You want to solve for localized problems. You don't want to solve for what they call in calculus global problems. You're not there yet, right? You're worried about 90% if the statistics is that 90% of the startups fail in the first year, you want to be in the 10%, which means that, so now you're solving for how do I be a part of that 10% startups, right? And therefore, for me to be there, considering the domain that I am in, what is the minimum money I need to make? So once you start inverting your problem statements, it is much more simpler for you on a day-to-day basis, that you have a simpler life, you are able to be much more productive, and you're able to have a simpler conversation with the people who are along with you on the journey, not just your co-founders but also your clients as well as your investors, in terms of what to expect from you as well as what cannot be done.
I think all these lessons are something I would personally note down onto and come back when, especially if I was a aspiring entrepreneur. And like, as a follow-up question to this, what's your biggest personal growth moment as a founder?
Is actually when I realized I don't need to do so much decision making. The traditional Indian businesses that you see, you have heard or you have read about, the perception that you have even in the movies etc. from old times is there is one guy or there is one set of people and they make all decisions and everybody else is just an actor playing out those pieces. That is not true, right? Managing smart people, walking into meetings and knowing that although you might have made a decision call, the room was ready with that decision and all the facts were laid out, and then being comfortable that okay, this is it and this is what you need to take. Being able to step back actually was a big founder's moment. That is where you also now know that okay, what you have created is already hit a particular momentum.
I think that is something we need to like pause, take it, let that sink in, and then come back onto it. And again, another question that I also had in mind was, how do you balance intuition versus analytics when it comes to decision making?
Your intuition has to be built on a mental a set of models that needs to have some element of science and data in it. Intuition is basically you saying that look, there is some output I have in my head which is leading me towards a particular decision or an assumption, but I am not able to ground it in facts or patterns, right? So if you can create your repository of facts and patterns, it is easier for you to get there. The problem with intuition, especially as you start working around a team, is you become a bad communicator of why something should be done and not done. Intuition is right, it needs to be there, but at least if not to be a science or statistics driven decision maker, retain your intuition but find out why. And at least for the purpose of being a good communicator and a good leader, you need to start aligning both of those pieces. They cannot be seen as they are two sides of the same coin, and you have to understand that in your head and you need to figure out your way around it.
Okay, so do you have any personal models that you often go back to?
One of the strongest things that have helped us in the early days around iteration, pivots, etc., is what we said earlier, statistics Bayes theorem, right? People don't understand this. Somebody might come to you. We did have team members who came in and said, look, 6 months back you said us that this is what it is, and now 6 months later you are saying let's now slightly move away from that. Why, right? You need to be a good communicator. You need to have that facts and data ready, that look, my assumption 6 months back was built on this set of data points, or these were the consumer conversations that we had. 6 months down the line, look at these are the things that have evolved or changed, and these are the new input that we have derived. Therefore today some of that is not true. Therefore today our understanding is maybe some of our key assumptions were inherently wrong to start off with, and therefore it does not make to continue a mistake, right? You have to be able to close the loop there. System thinking is an extremely powerful tool. Mental models are extremely good reference points. The challenge with mental models is it can be a very boxed in view.
Okay.
What would be better is a combination of, there's something called Wadley maps. So if you are able to look at everything from that point of view, that's a slightly larger picture that you get. The thing with mental models is continuously evolving, and what is true in one context might not be true in another context, right? But I think Wadley maps, systems thinking, and a good understanding of your own biases and the fact that anybody opening their mouth to you from a problem statement, product point of view, etc., could also be driven by their biases. These are good places to get started with.
I think all these system thinking is a reference from Thinking Fast and Slow, and
System thinking has been a domain that has been there for a while. Thinking Fast and Slow is what brought it into the consumer mindset. right? But it's been a proper curriculum in a lot of schools. There's a lot of predated material also that is available, where thinking fast and slow has made it easier, but you have to realize that you're just seeing the tip of the iceberg there. Beneath that, there are actual mathematical models in systems thinking for a lot of problem solving approaches, etc. That's not something a founder needs to be worried in the first 365 days.
So where do you pick up all these mental models and the maps that you've been mentioning? Do you have like particular sources our students or first time founders could refer to so that they could also have that high level thinking capabilities that they could build on?
Keep reading. There are a few great blogs, even outside of the standard toolkit today, which is Paul Graham, Sam Altman, etc. You have there is there's Common Cog. Then there is I think Farnham blog, FS. FS talks a lot about mental models. Common Cog is completely anti-mental model in the sense that mental models can drive you down a rabbit hole. So what has generally worked for me is I'll read or I'll be understanding something and always also be trying to get some material on the counterpoint view.
Okay.
So that you know where you need to balance yourself and place yourself in that goes back to the Wadley map, right? If you're only reading a particular topic, you're creating a mental model. But you also need to understand what is the landscape in which that model was created.
Setting the context for both the sides of the coin. Okay.
Yes.
Your top 3 favorite books or your 3 blogs?
3 blogs would be Every, Common Cog, and I don't remember the third one. It's bookmarked, but.
Okay. Any of your favorite book that a first time founder should read?
The Mom Test.
Okay.
The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Mm-hmm.
The last is not that well known. It's called Business Cycles.
Okay.
It's a history on business and capital itself.
Okay.
That includes business models, industries, domains. It's a fairly large 2-part book. Each part is about 800 pages.
Oof, okay.
But you understand, the degree of understanding that you can take away from that is extensive. India specific founders, the other one I would recommend is We Are Like That Only, by Rama Bijakpur, and there's one more book written by her. I think these 2 are good books.
I think with that we have almost come to the end of our podcast session. I think we can close it down with a rapid fire question.
Sure.
So it should be a very quick answer. You can't think too much time about it. Okay.
It goes against my behavior.
Okay. So the rapid question was the last thing that you binge watched and the most overrated business advice you've heard.
The last thing I binge watched was The Reacher. The most overrated business advice I ever received was spend on acquisition.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much for coming onto the show today. It was great talking to you. We've learned a lot of insights, and I think I'll have to put up a lot of references on the screen with the books and different concepts that you've spoken about. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. This was good.
Thank you.